If you're looking for pound the best home health and beauty fragrance products, you need to go to ashkickin.com.
Hi, I'm Angie and you're watching Dante's Boxing Nation.
Dante's Boxing Nation, what's going on, guys? So according to Gennady Golovkin and his trainer, they don't believe that Canelo Alvarez actually wants the rematch in September. Matter of fact, this is what Abel Sanchez and Gennady Golovkin had to say. So this is what Abel Sanchez said. He said if Alvarez isn't doing anything to rectify the issues that are in front of him right now, maybe he's doing that on purpose. Maybe he doesn't want the fight. That gives him an out. It's the feeling I've had for a while. If contaminated meat was the issue, maybe that was the issue to begin with. Maybe he didn't want to fight on the 5th. I wouldn't say he doesn't want it. He may not want it right now. And then Golovkin, he basically agreed, assuming that maybe Alvarez, he wants to possibly push the fight to next year as opposed to facing Golovkin in September. So Golovkin, he responded by saying, I don't exclude that. Maybe he's just playing with time. He has this opportunity. That's what he's trying to do, end quote. So, I don't know if I believe that Canelo Alvarez, he started eating contaminated meat just so he can get suspended, mess up his whole reputation, which really creates an adverse effect. I don't believe that's the case. There are many ways you can do this without your name being synonymous with performance-enhancing drugs for the rest of your career. He just failed this test, and that was not a part of the plan. Now, coincidentally, Team Canelo, they actually said the same thing about Gennady Golovkin when they first failed this clenbuterol test. They made the allegations that maybe Gennady Golovkin really doesn't want the fight, and he's trying to find a way out of the fight. So you have both parties saying the same thing about each other. And I don't believe either way that's the case. Because if neither one of these guys wanted to fight, they would have did the same thing they did when fighters like Andre Ward, the Charlo brothers, Andrade, and all these other fighters called them out. They would have did the same thing they did then, which is don't respond and certainly don't sign a contract to fight them, right? That's what you do when you don't want to fight someone. You don't sign the contract, start training, and in the middle of training, all of a sudden you say, I decided I don't want the fight. That's not the case. Now let's talk about Gennady Golovkin's dilemma. So the problems and the concerns for Gennady Golovkin's team continue to pile up. The day the news broke that Canelo Alvarez had tested positive for a PED, and then later on he was suspended and the fight was canceled, I told you this was a snowball effect that will pull down Golovkin along with Canelo. And that's exactly what we're seeing right now, guys. Because now that Golovkin is not facing Canelo next, he doesn't get that big payday, number one. The cancellation of this fight, it caused so many problems for Gennady Golovkin because now he has to either face his number one mandatory, Sergey Derevyanchenko, by August 3rd, or give up one of his belts. And if you guys have been following Gennady Golovkin and you've been listening to everything he's been telling the public, his goal was to be a unified middleweight champion. He wanted to make history, and now he may not be able to do that because in order for him to become a unified champion, that means he will be forced to face the best competition he's faced in his career. And that is a Ukrainian Olympian, Sergey Derevyanchenko, who has the type of amateur experience that Gennady Golovkin himself has. And then he has Golovkin, that is, he has the WBC mandatory, which is Jamal Charlo, and then he has the WBA mandatory, which is Danny Jacobs. And we all know, let's not even kid ourselves, we all know there is absolutely no way Golovkin is going to face all of his mandatories. He's going to give up as many belts as he can to avoid this stiff competition that's in front of him right now. You guys remember when Andre Ward was calling him out, when Golovkin said, "I'll fight anyone from 154 to 168. And then Andre Ward was like, "Hey, well, I'm the best fighter pound for pound in the world, and I'm fighting at 168. Let's make the fight happen." Gennady Golovkin wanted no parts of Andre Ward because deep down, Gennady Golovkin, he understood that Andre Ward was, quite frankly, the Michael Jordan of the sport, or one of the Michael Jordans of the sport. His trainer, Abel Sanchez, understood this, and Gennady Golovkin understood this. So what Andre Ward did is he forced Team Golovkin to switch up what they said their personal goals were. They had to retrack. Instead of saying that they want to fight anyone from 154 to 168, they had to change that to, we want to stay at 160 and unify all the belts. Dante's Boxing Nation, what's going on, guys? So the fight goes down this weekend. Vanes Martirosyan, he goes up against the middleweight champion, Gennady Golovkin. Today was the press conference. Earlier today was the press conference. Vanes Martirosyan, he said he'll be stronger at the weight at 160. I mean, we hear a lot of fighters that move up in weight say this. We'll see what happens. The one thing about Vanes Martirosyan is he's never been knocked out before. He definitely has lost to some very good fighters. So if you want to give him credit for fighters that he's been in the ring with, you can definitely do that. Only problem is it wasn't at middleweight. It was at super welterweight. He fought the likes of Charlo and Lara and many other fighters. Andrade as well too. So he's fought everyone, but he lost to all of them. And he's been out of the ring for 2 years. And his last fight was a loss. So we'll see how this fight plays out. But when it comes to Gennady Golovkin, Golovkin has much bigger problems than Vanes Martirosyan. He has a lot of big problems. One of them is Sergey Derevyanchenko, his #1 mandatory, IBF mandatory. He has a lot of mandatories now. Sergey Derevyanchenko is just up in rotation as #1. He's in front of the line right now. Matter of fact, it's getting so serious that the IBF, they have already threatened to strip Golovkin if he doesn't face his #1 IBF mandatory next. He has to face Sergey by August 3rd or be stripped of his IBF title. Okay? And then it gets even worse for Golovkin because let's just say if he were to do that, then he has to worry about his WBC mandatory, which is Jamal Charlo. That'll be the next guy up in rotation when it comes to Golovkin defending his belts. So if Golovkin's excuse to not fight pound for pound #1 after Floyd Mayweather retired, Andre Ward, if his excuse not to fight Andre Ward was so he can stay at 160 and unify the belts, and now he gives up his belts because he has very tough competition in his own division, then that completely shatters and exposes that excuse that Gennady Golovkin used to not fight Andre Ward. He's in a bad situation right now, is Golovkin. A really bad situation. Guys, it's just ironic to me that only in the sport of boxing, in every other sport, that's what you dream of. You dream of your team, you dream of your favorite player, your favorite team advancing to the finals, the gold medal match, the Super Bowl, if you will. But in the sport of boxing, you have certain fighters on the hope list that do whatever they can do in their will to avoid going to the finals, the playoffs, the Super Bowl. And then you have their fans they will defend them by saying, oh, you must be just hating on Gennady Golovkin if you want to see him go to the finals. If you want to see him in the playoffs, you're just hating on him because you want to see him lose in the playoffs. You want to see him lose in the Super Bowl. So even the fans of certain fighters on the hope list, they would prefer for their favorite fighters to avoid the finals by all means necessary. And the things that Gennady Golovkin is doing today, he's just making it harder on his fans. He's making it more difficult for them to try to find ways to defend his actions. This is what I mean. When Gennady Golovkin has 3 mandatories, right? And they're all tough fights, all tough challenges. And he decides to fight a guy who's not even ranked, not even a middleweight, coming off of a loss, has been inactive for 2 years. You just know how the story goes. He's fighting this guy instead. And then Golovkin is forcing his fans to make fools of themselves by trying to defend something that you cannot defend. By saying something like, oh, well, who has Charlo fought? When you say who has Charlo fought, these fans don't even realize that makes Golovkin look even worse. Because if a fan will criticize Golovkin for facing Charlo when Charlo is his mandatory, how do you think that makes Golovkin look for facing the Willie Monroes, the Dominic Wades, etc., etc., etc.? The fans are trying to defend Golovkin. They're making him look even worse. Because if you would say that Charlo hasn't fought anyone, how do you justify Golovkin fighting once again Wade, Monroe, and Vanes Martirosyan, who hasn't even fought at middleweight, who's not even ranked in the middleweight division? There's no way you can defend what Gennady Golovkin is doing right now. And if you try to do it, you're going to make Golovkin look even worse. If Gennady Golovkin retires without facing the Jamal Charlos, the Danny Jacobs, taking the Danny Jacobs rematch. And let me talk about rematches for a second. Because if you look at the history in the sport of boxing, when it comes to the greats, a lot of the greats, they had challenges where they faced certain opponents that were so tough to beat, gave them so many problems in the ring, they gave that fighter a rematch. And most of the times, these fighters, they came back and they beat that tough challenger and erased all doubt by further solidifying their greatness. This is what Floyd Mayweather did when he had a close decision win over Castillo. This is what Andre Ward did when he had a close decision win over Sergey Kovalev, and the list goes on and on and on. So when you have Gennady Golovkin in his toughest fight against Danny Jacobs, it's more than obvious. You would think the natural thing to do in that situation is give the fans and give Danny Jacobs a rematch, right? And show that when you are challenged, when you are dealing with the type of adversity that you've never dealt with before, you can come back the same way Floyd Mayweather did, the same way Andre Ward did, and show that you are levels above Danny Jacobs, right? This is what you would expect a real champion to do. Now, Golovkin, he's doing a rematch with Canelo, but he's not doing it with Danny Jacobs. And that tells you a lot about what he thinks about Danny Jacobs as opposed to Canelo Alvarez. He feels Canelo Alvarez, if this was a video game and you know how you could change the difficulty level, well, he feels that fighting against Canelo Alvarez, let's just say, is more on either easy or normal. But fighting against Charlo, or even giving Danny Jacobs a rematch, that's putting the game on hard or extremely hard. So a lot of choices, a lot of options for Gennady Golovkin, excuse me. Well, hell, there's a lot of options for Canelo too. But since we're talking about Golovkin and him having all these damn mandatories, he has a lot of options. Let's see what he does, guys. It'll be really interesting to see what happens with Golovkin within the next year. That's all I got for now, guys. I'm on to the next one. What's going on, y'all? Brooklyn, New York. It's going down. We out here for the Wilder versus Ortiz fight. It should be a great fight. Once again, I'm loving it out here in Brooklyn, New York, from Las Vegas, Long Beach to Brooklyn. This is how we do it. On to the next one, y'all.
Yo, this is Deontay the Bronze Bomber Wilder, and you're watching Dante's Boxing Nation, baby.